He wrote a very extensive piece about this at theathletic.com, which is a fantastic look at that 2021 pick and why the Sixers, PT, we talked about it, might be a player now. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline for a closer look at the 2021 draft pick. It's 3 years down the road, Sam. Why is this pick so valuable?
Yeah, I think that it's valuable to both Philadelphia and to other teams in a potential trade. That obviously is the first thing you have to note here. And the reason that I wanted to write this is just because you kind of see Philadelphia fans. They see the bright, shiny thing in front of them that is Mikal Bridges, right? He's a Philadelphia kid, perfect fit for the roster. And they end up moving him on draft night in a relatively, I don't want to say controversial, but it was a decision that got a lot of press, obviously, given the circumstances of his selection. So the difference between Zaire Smith and Mikal Bridges is not so great that, when you're talking about this valuable 2021 pick, that it's not worth going down that road because this 2021 pick, it's almost impossible now to get unprotected draft picks and in trades, and here Philadelphia is now sitting with one in 2021 when we have no idea what Miami's going to look like then.
Yeah, that's the crux of a lot of this is, Sam, that teams aren't willing to give up those picks. It all kind of started a couple of years ago where we kept hearing top 3 protected, or it's protected from 5 to 16, or, Sam Hinkie had the flip with the Kings. There was always provisions. How were the Sixers able to get Phoenix to give them that pick with no provisions on it?
So, yeah, it's worth explaining how this pick got to Phoenix in the first place. It happened back in 2015 with the Goran Dragic trade, whenever Phoenix kind of went down the tubes a little bit following a really successful 2014 season and had to move on from both Isaiah Thomas and Goran Dragic in the same year. And Miami was willing to pony up and decided that they were willing to move these 2 first-round picks. One, I believe, was in 2017 or so, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. And then this future pick as well that they just decided to throw in unprotected. And why Phoenix was able to give up this pick is a question to me, but I think I kind of understand what happened here. So Mikal Bridges is obviously an incredibly ready-to-play player, given that he was a 4-year player at Villanova, obviously actually played on the floor for 3 of those, but took a redshirt year in his first year. And the Phoenix Suns, under Ryan McDonough specifically, need to start winning basketball games. Otherwise, it seems likely that owner Robert Sarver is going to get a little bit impatient and decide to move on, given that every single season McDonough has been there has resulted in a diminishing win total. So to get an NBA-ready player like Mikal Bridges is just a little bit more valuable to them right now than holding on to a pick that 3 years down the road might be incredibly valuable to them, but the same people might not necessarily be in charge.
Sam Vecenie with us from The Athletic. Sam, how does this 2020 free agent class then help this pick become potentially more valuable?
Yeah, the 2020 class does not shape up to be particularly strong. And, of course, when you're projecting free agency classes years in advance, it's really difficult. LeBron James could sign a 2-year contract and re-enter in 2020. Kevin Durant could sign a 2-year contract, re-enter in 2020. But just kind of given where that class is right now, where the most likely high-end free agents are a 30-year-old Draymond Green, maybe a 31-year-old DeMar DeRozan because he'd have to opt out. Same with Andre Drummond. He'd be like 26 or so, but he has to opt out of almost $30 million. Gordon Hayward would have to opt out of $34 million. Otto Porter would have to opt out of $28 million. So these decisions create a circumstance where the 2020 free agency class is not going to be particularly strong. And the reason that that's important is that Miami is next set to be a player in free agency in that 2020 class because of the way that their contract situation kind of plays out right now with Hassan Whiteside, Goran Dragic, and Tyler Johnson's contracts all coming off the books that summer. So they could have something like $60 million in cap space if things were to play out the way that I think they want them to play out. But given that the free agency class is a little bit lower, it might not necessarily end up being a situation where Miami is significantly helped by having their cap space in that summer.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you bring up because, Sam, a lot of people ask about Miami and think, all right, they're competitive. Pat Riley's not going to let this team fall off the map, but they have done it in the past where they were angling towards some sort of free agency and they ended up with LeBron James. So they are a big player for this pick.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're a big player in free agency every single time that they have cap space. That's just the reality of a situation where you're in Miami with the weather, the beaches, the nightlife. You have no state income tax in Florida. It's very advantageous for Miami to have cap space. But you look at a situation, and obviously they could use their cap space for trades and figure out different ways to get the players that they want in there. But it's a little bit more complicated than what I think ends up playing out. So I don't think Miami is going to be disastrously bad in 2021. You're probably not talking about a situation where this pick becomes a top 3 pick, but it might be a top 10 pick. I would feel pretty decent about it being a top 10 pick. And if you're talking about a top 10 pick in 2021, along with the number 16 pick in 2018, I mean, that's obviously worth a lot more than just the 2010 pick or the number 10 pick in 2018.
Sam, we've heard so much about the potential end of the one and done happening in maybe 2021 for that draft. Now, why does that make the pick so valuable?
So, yeah, the 2021 draft or the 2022 draft, depending on what the NBA decides, are shaping up throughout the league as the most likely ones to see the one and done end. And the reason that that's important is that the year that the one and done ends, you're going to see a situation where one single draft is going to have all of the best players from 2 recruiting classes, 2 high school recruiting classes, that is. And the reason that's important is that it will, given averages of how many one and done lottery picks there have been over the last 3 or 4 years, it's going to add something like 7 to 9 high quality draft picks into a single draft that you would have to hope is obviously going to be of average strength to begin with. So you're talking about a draft that's going to end up being probably not double the strength of what a typical draft is, but it will be a much deeper draft throughout the lottery. And it creates a situation where even if that Miami pick doesn't necessarily end up being the number 3, number 2, even number 1 pick, and it ends up being in that number 10 range, you might end up with something like a typical number 5, number 6 overall pick at the number 10 pick in that single draft.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a great player, but that would, Sam, I guess, mean that more teams will want to get their hands on guys in that draft. Whether they work out or not, you're going to have more action because there's going to be more talent. So even if the Sixers were to still have that pick, they could take a guy or they're going to have a lot of calls on draft night. But the possibility of that pick between now and then, is it more valuable to them as a trade chip or to hold on to for 3 years?
I think it's probably more valuable as a trade chip just because of the uncertainty that surrounds it. It's a highly volatile asset because we don't know what Miami is going to look like. It's very possible that Miami signs 31-year-old DeMar DeRozan that summer and ends up being like the number 6 seed in the Eastern Conference, and it ends up being like the number 20 overall pick. It'd still be valuable, but it wouldn't necessarily have the same value as what people can see the upside of it being now. So I think it's more valuable as a trade chip. It could be the piece that Philadelphia uses to get them seriously into the Kawhi Leonard sweepstakes. It could be the piece that Philadelphia uses if someone like Damian Lillard or if Anthony Davis was to turn down the Supermax extension that New Orleans can offer him next summer. That is a situation where having all of these assets, having this treasure chest of assets that teams value around the NBA is incredibly valuable, and this just added to it, only at the cost of, downgrading from Mikal Bridges to Zaire Smith, which it's a downgrade, but it's not like a substantial one in my opinion.
Yeah, so it seems like the Sixers now have something that they didn't have that other teams, I don't want to say you would yearn for, but it will certainly open the door for a conversation.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. In Philadelphia, they're already in these conversations. I mean, you can make the case that Philadelphia can present San Antonio for Kawhi Leonard this summer a better offer than almost anyone can. Maybe you could say Boston can present San Antonio with a better offer, but Philadelphia is right there with them, and it would just depend on what San Antonio is looking for and if Philadelphia would be willing to take on the risk of a one-year rental in Kawhi Leonard. So this is the kind of move that puts them even closer to over the top in potential Kawhi Leonard talks.
How much do you think the Leonard's previous relationship with Brett Brown maybe not stacks the deck, but helps them out to make them feel better that it's not a one-year rental, that they can convince them to stay long-term?
It'd help, but, the feeling around the NBA is certainly that Kawhi Leonard seems set on Los Angeles at this moment. Last summer, Paul George, it was assumed that he was set on Los Angeles, right? And now we're looking at a situation where Kawhi Leonard is considering staying in Oklahoma City with Russell Westbrook after being there for a year. So I think that relationship helps, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a significant factor whenever the decision finally comes down to it, when Kawhi has to make a call on if he wants to continue his career in Los Angeles or stay with whoever ends up acquiring him, or San Antonio if they keep him.
Hey, Sam, you mentioned the drop-off from Bridges to Smith. What do you think about Smith? Is he a guy that is an attractive piece? Like, is he the kind of guy the Sixers draft because they like him, or do they think other teams would find interest in him?
I think that whenever you're selecting players, you're almost always drafting them because you like them and hoping that at the end of the day, your evaluators and your evaluation process has picked out players that will grow and mature and become assets throughout the rest of the league. So in Zaire Smith's case, he's an incredible athlete, 6'4" with a 6'10" wingspan. He's already a very high-end defender. And that's going to fit in with what the culture that Philadelphia really wants to establish, even in spite of Lloyd Pierce, their defensive kind of guru on the bench, is from the assistant standpoint moving on to Atlanta. So having a guy like Zaire Smith, I think he's going to step in as a backup pretty early, be able to defend at a high level. Where his ceiling is going to be determined by what his offensive development ends up becoming. He really needs to develop the jump shot, and he really needs to be able to start to attack closeouts more consistently and be able to take guys off the dribble more consistently. If he can do that, we're in a situation where Philadelphia may have ended up getting a better player than Mikal Bridges at the end of the day. I don't think that anyone around the NBA would argue with the fact that Smith, due to his athleticism and length, has a higher ceiling than what Mikal Bridges does. It's just that Mikal Bridges is fit and his readiness to play was particularly attractive to Philadelphia.
Sam Vecenie from The Athletic. It's a really good piece. Check it out at theathletic.com. And he's got a whole mapped-out reason about the value of this 2021 pick, which a lot of people are still kind of not sure of why they did it, but he maps it out pretty good as to what the Sixers can do with that 2021 pick. Sam, we appreciate your time, pal.
Anytime, guys.
Thanks,
Sam _Vecenie from The Athletic.